number 3, and that's actually fitting thematically because it's the third Clash album that we're doing. We've previously done the self-titled debut and Give 'Em Enough Rope, and this is London Calling. Let's go ahead and play a clip here for you to hear a little bit. In the opener, you heard Spanish Bombs, and now you're going to hear Guns of Brixton for bio, because we've covered a lot of the history right here. Matt, why don't you go ahead and run the numbers for me?
So London Calling comes in at number 5 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums, number 1 in 1979, number 18 of all time. It is the Clash's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, and it also made Rolling Stone's list, coming in at number 16. So I think this is another certified banger, John.
Another certified banger, and another double album as well, for those that may not have listened to this. So let's go to the basics first. London Calling was released on December 14th, 1979 by CBS Records in the UK. It is released in the United States in January of 1980, and that is why it ended up on the Rolling Stone charts for both best albums of the 70s and the 80s because of the different release dates. It was a bona fide success in the UK. It was a top 10 chart success, and London Calling was a top 20 single. And it also was platinum in the United States, which was not always something that was part of the narrative for The Clash before that. And so this was, I'm not going to say it's their breakthrough in the US, but it was definitely the album that sort of shot them up the charts. We've talked quite a bit about the Clash's history in previous segments on the two albums that I mentioned. So we've talked quite a bit about the Clash in previous episodes. So I'll give a brief bio that leads into this one, and we're actually going to do Sandinista as well. So
I won't go
that.
Yeah,
that's 3 albums.
Triple album. We should just do a Sandinista week, John.
Yeah, really.
There you go. So one of the things that stands out about the Clash in this time period is, and you heard it a little bit on Give 'Em Enough Rope, but this is where they decide to broaden their musical horizons. And boy, they don't do anything half-assed, because they broaden their horizons, do all kinds of stuff. But one of the main things that was a through line on this album is that when they toured the U.S. for the first time ahead of this album, they were choosing very interesting supporting acts in front of them. They actually had Bo Diddley at one point, as well as a couple other classic R&B artists like Screamin' Jay Hawkins and Lee Dorsey. They had the Cramps, who's a punk rockabilly band, open, and then they also had an artist described as a neo-traditional country artist, Joe Eli, as well ahead of this. I guess that's a long way of saying that they got really into the roots of rock and roll during this period, which thematically you will hear both in the lyrics and the sound at different times. They also separated from their manager, Bernard Rhodes, who we talked about quite a bit in the self-titled album segment. It was I didn't see too much that it was an overwhelmingly acrimonious split. I could be wrong about that. It just sort of, in all of the research I did, it just sort of said like the time had come for them to move on. So I got the feeling it was a little bit of a difference of opinion in terms of sonically where the Clash wanted to go and maybe what he kind of wanted to continue having them do. And so basically they arrive in May 1979 with no songs written for this album at all, not one. Both Mick Jones and Joe Strummer, the two primary songwriters, had both gone through a period of significant writer's block, and between the two of them, they didn't have anything. So the recording of this album is basically they got together and they built themselves a schedule, and an actual schedule. And what this schedule was they would rehearse in the afternoon, followed by playing soccer together, or they'd said football sessions during these recording things. They would then go have a couple beers at a local pub, and then they would do a second recording session in the evening, sometimes into the early evening hours. And that was how they did this. They were pretty disciplined in terms of doing the rehearsals, because I think they kind of realized that this was their chance to sort of ascend to another level. Another thing they did was it was just them. They kept everybody else outside of it as they experimented with stuff. And I think part of it was they wanted to have an open palette in terms of trying out different sounds sonically without sort of being judged or having people's input. And that is kind of a little bit of the background of how London Calling was created.
I also want to say, John, I saw in Rolling Stone that they mentioned that when they were writing some of these songs, they were doing so in Joe Strummer's grandmother's flat, which I thought was interesting.
Yes, some of them were there. Yeah,
hey, Grandma. Can we use your attic? Like, anyway, go ahead.
But for those that don't know much about the Clash in terms of their composition, Joe Strummer writes most of the lyrics and Mick Jones composes most of the music. So, and that does not change on this album. This also marks the beginning of Paul Simonon's first credit, which is the Guns of Brixton, which he both wrote and sang on. So it's his first time singing, and he was originally doubtful, but he actually was encouraged by Joe Strummer to work on it, and it ended up on the album. Now, he would write and sing on other songs down the road too, but that was the first. And this album was pretty much immediately critically acclaimed by pretty much all the critics, regardless of what album they were writing in. And also, it is the rare album that was, in its time, regarded highly, and then retrospectively, probably even more highly regarded than it was even at the time. And it was highly regarded at the time. So, thematically, you probably have figured out it is about London. A lot of the songs are in London, about what's going on in London, which is a common theme of segments we've been doing recently. There are discussions about violence. There's political songs, multiple, like 4 or 5 political songs. And there's also things about getting older and sort of the climate of joblessness in England at the time and other sort of adult themes. There's a couple songs about sex, albeit, in a punk way, which is never about like glorifying it or, conquest, right? It's more about like Lovers Rock is about safe sex and family planning, and sex in the construct of a relationship is also there as well. So that's there, and the amount of inspirations musically. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about it in here, but there's upwards of almost 12 to 15 different genres of music that are touched on this in terms of by design. Now, whether or not they were successful, I guess that's up to you guys to share with the listeners. So I think this one starts with Matt. Matt, thoughts on London Calling?
Yeah, so this is another album that I actually did know pretty well. Years ago, I bought it when I was kind of going on a kick of, hey, I need to listen to these albums that are supposedly like the best albums of all time.
Before you die.
Before I die, exactly. Yeah, I did my own list of that. So, I really like this record. The variety, absolutely, that's what stands out. I remember when I got this, I was like thinking, the Clash are a punk band, because that's here, but there's a whole lot more here. This is not a punk album. This is just an album of all kinds of stuff. It's interesting that you said the Bo Diddley, John, because there's a lot of Bo Diddley beat going on in here. In some ways, and sometimes it's like more of a subtle. It's not like the the in your face kind of Bo Diddley beat, but it's there nonetheless. And there's several songs like, what is it, Hateful and Rudy Can't Fail stand out definitely with that. So I always like that. So there is kind of like that homage to old school rock and roll, the Brand New Cadillac. That's the second song that kind of has that spy versus spy kind of like the B-52s had that like whatever that is. So that was kind of an interesting song.
It's like
there.
Surf guitar, isn't it? That's
that's what I wrote down.
That's a good that's probably a better way of saying it. For some reason I think of the Spies, but and I think there's ska on here that I do like.
There is.
Yeah, because what is it? Wrong and Boyle is definitely a ska song. That might be the most ska song on here. I don't know if you guys would agree with that, but I think I was taking that away from that. Rudy Can't Fail has a little bit of the ska thing going on. And interesting,
Rudy by definition is a ska term. So
Rude Boy. Okay. All right, there you go. And it's the right profile is kind of interesting because there's horns in that, and I love that song. That's a deep cut for me on this. I really that's a great upbeat kind of danceable song, but it's slower. And one of the things I noticed, it's got the horns, but the strumming of the guitar is done on the downbeat, not on the upbeat. So usually like ska is more of an upbeat kind of a thing. And I was listening
that's
to
reggae.
Reggae would be the downbeat.
Is it so? I thought ska was too, though, just done faster.
I think sometimes, Matt, when you hear
reggae's
horns,
on the downbeat,
you think
right?
Reggae's horns, just horns. But yeah, reggae's on the downbeat. That's
right, reggae's on the downbeat,
song.
ska's on the upbeat, right? So, so the right profile's done on the downbeat, and I like that, and I like reggae better. So it's kind of interesting. I was just thinking of that when listening to that song, and I'm like, for some reason, that style of music with the horns and kind of like the upbeat kind of danceable nature, I'm going to gravitate towards that much more on the downbeat than on the upbeat, which is interesting because I'm not always averse to upbeats on in parts of songs. But
to me, Rudy Can't Fail's a rock steady song more so than it is a ska song.
Okay,
that's a whole nother thing for you to.
Yeah, probably, right. But I'm just saying elements of it. But Wrong and Boyle, I was definitely that ska, and I like that song. So I think a couple of things. I think the downbeat I definitely like better, and I think that I was wondering if something like The Right Profile, if that could have been done on the upbeat, and that would have been more ska, and maybe I wouldn't have liked it as much. I just thought that was an interesting kind of thought that I had. But and it's just got freaking Guns of Brixton. Okay, this is like, how is that? That's like the hip hop sample here, right? Like that bass line is freaking fantastic, and it's so different. That stands out as kind of a unique song on this record for me. I love how it ends with Train in Vain. I think that's a really good. It's kind of like a pop song almost. It's like it very
tacked it on really.
Yeah, I mean it sounds a little bit. It's a cleaner song. It's not as edgy, I would say, but it definitely adds texture to this record. So there's just so many songs on here. The Card Sheet's another song that I really like. So I don't really think there's anything that I'm down on terribly. Lovers Rock, I'm a little lukewarm on. To me, I don't know, the music just isn't there as much at the chorus. And for some reason, Lost in the Supermarket doesn't do a whole lot for me either.
Oh, man,
there's parts of it that they do, but the chorus not as much. But those are minor complaints. Overall, I think this album is great. And I love the variety. I love the edge. I love the vocals. The voices. The singing voices of Strummer and Jones. So yeah, it's a really interesting record, and it's clear that they're trying to be more than just a punk band. I read somewhere that they were, kind of feeling like at this point punk is becoming like a passing fad almost, but almost just kind of like there's got to be more to it than this, right? Because since it's so minimalistic that there's only so much you can get and do with it before it starts to wear out its welcome a little bit. And so it's nice to see them kind of like going in this direction of just let's take that and expand it into a variety of other ways, and they do it really, really well. So thumbs up for me on this.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this album before, but it's been a while, and what a great album. I agree. It's really kind of the variety that they bring that is the strength of the album, and song after song of singability and listenability all the way through. I think probably Lovers Rock, where I started being like, okay, that's enough, and that's like 15 songs. So and all of the songs sound different, and like Matt said, they incorporate the ska throughout, which I love. They incorporate horns very well, and they kind of punctuate songs, and it's not overdone. They like Lost in the Supermarket, which I do like, is kind of like an 80s song almost or 80s like pop hit. And like you said, this album is, I don't know if it shows growth, but it shows their ability to expand their sound more. They've kind of, as we've said, they've kind of always been doing this to some extent since the beginning, but in a way that like they're really confident on this album in maintaining their kind of core identity and that punk rock spirit without being really a punk rock album. I also agree. I was surprised it's not really like a punk rock album in the way that their first two albums are. It is more expansive and probably accessible as a result, and I think that's kind of why this is the hallmark album for them. There's something on here for everyone. I feel like if you don't like this album, there's something wrong with you. There's you didn't bring up Spanish Bombs, which is a fantastic song, and I like that they incorporate the actual Spanish dialogue.
There's a lot of songs to bring up. I mean,
yes, that's true.
19 of them.
I'm just gonna name all the songs.
Yeah.
What else? Strummer, like you said, John, they're still bringing the political perspective and kind of statements into it right from first song with London Calling, which is kind of like an apocalyptic song in a way that they're going to get London's going to get blown up, or they're going to get drowned. But they're
it's about nuclear war.
Yeah. Yep. And and they're, I don't know. This is just a really great track. album, and I appreciate the breadth of it and their ability to experiment. I think I like when Mick Jones, he sings as well in this, right, John? Not only does he write the music.
Yeah, 5 or 6 tracks. He like Lost in the Supermarket. He does Card Cheat. He sort of sings with Strummer in Clampdown. Rudy Can't Fail. He sings on. Yeah, there might be another one in there too. Yeah.
I guess point being, I like that he sings as well. That kind of breaks it up a little bit, because Strummer's voice, as we've said, is not like the strongest.
Train in Vain. He sings Train in Vain. Yeah.
And he sings I'm Not Down.
Okay.
I guess he does. Yeah. Okay.
So he brings a freshness to it as well. Death and Glory. I'll name that song. I think that's a great deep cut song. I love that song. And this album is one of those albums that's worth re-listening to. I think there's something to it. It's going to be really high on my year-end lists, and it just makes me appreciate the Clash more listening to it this time.
Yeah, I mean, this is number 1 in my 70s list. It's no doubt. I mean, it's this. The Clash.
Oh man, you tipped your hand, John.
And why? I mean, why even beat? I mean, this is. It's been on. They've been. Matt and Josh have been very positive, but like I'm going to go more effusive on this. I mean,
John, here it comes. Here comes the O face.
The amount of artistic growth. The amount of artistic growth from 1977 to 1979 here is pretty remarkable, considering that you remember the Clash like kind of just picked up their guitars, 2.5 years ahead of this. And I mean, often the story is told about the Beatles, right? Like, but the Beatles were gigging for years before they were doing this. These
like
guys
half of their career.
And Joe Strummer was kind of playing right before the Clash got together in 76-ish, 77. I mean, because really, if you remember, they kind of started playing, and then a few months later they had a deal because of the scene they were at. To think of them as sort of a band that started as a rudimentary punk band and then gets to this is remarkable on so many fronts. They maintain the tightness of a punk band, but in all these different genres. B, they can play all of these different genres without seeming like they're appropriating from them, which is difficult to do. C, they write incredibly good lyrics for these, and all of this is a germination period of about 3 years, right? Which is incredible. I can't think of a band that would have put an album this accomplished together in this small amount of time. You know what I mean? As musicians, basically. So that's kind of remarkable. I think it's also amazing that this album's a double album, and it never gets tedious, like at all, till the very end, to the point that you get to Train in Vain that they tack on, and you're just like, for me, I could still go 4 or 5 more songs. It's excellent in that, and I mean the first 2 albums of this, side 1 and side 2, I should say, on album 1. I mean,
it's like
I don't know.
If they just
I don't know if there is an album that I like better from track 1 through 10 at all, right? Than that. I don't know. I don't know if there's an album I can think of. I mean, toward the end, it loses a little bit of steam, which is probably why it might not be my all-time favorite. But it's not far from it. And you guys touched on stuff that's there, the reggae tinge and the ska tinge to a lesser extent, the rock steady / what would become reggaeton, different stuff is there as well. What has been undersold a little bit is certainly the roots rock and roll. I mean, they're kind of doing what Bruce Springsteen always tries to do a little bit, like take it back to the roots of rock. And there's a reason I know Springsteen's a huge Clash fan, because a lot of what they're doing here is kind of, I think, what like Springsteen does for certain people, but this lens of it is just so much more appealing to me than some of that lane. There's also, as we get a hi there from Rain right in the background.
Sorry about that.
Josh, feed your dog.
No problem. Yeah. So I also want to mention that there's a new wave vibe to this at times as well.
Yes, you're right. Yes, absolutely.
And that's a genre you didn't mention. And it's not, none of these genres dominate the album, which is why I love it so much, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that there wasn't a new wave. And another thing that we didn't mention is there's a little bit of jazz on this album too.
Yep.
Jimmy Jazz, comes in, just different stuff like that as well. So they're genre hopping, and it's just so easy to genre hop and be cliche or contrived or just misfire. And I think what's remarkable is they just don't misfire in the genres they're in, and they pay homage to them respectfully. And I think that's because they themselves explored it from the standpoint of wanting to learn, as opposed to just taking from it, without, and that goes into the punk and the Clash's, element, right? And that's they maintain their Clashness while doing it, which is I think why they can do it, because they do it in a way that's about learning and respecting, as opposed to just, oh, I like this thing and let me hear it, and who are the people that do this? Oh, okay. Like, even though they had Bo Diddley open for them, you never in a million years go, oh, wouldn't it be cool to get Bo Diddley because he's the R&B guy? I think it's more like they picked him along with others because it's like we're on this kick of listening to this stuff, and here's who we like. And I think it's the same way with the delving into reggae, and it's just such an interesting way to take the British scene that we've been talking about from, say, 76-ish to now as we start the 80s. It kind of really does scoop up everything in terms of influences and put it into album format and synthesize it. And I think that's what The Lasting Legacy is. One of my favorite periods of music, the late 70s in England, right? And this is sort of like the magnum opus of all of those things rolled into one by a band that's at the peak of their powers and is just so tight. As a band, they're just really, really tight. If you watch performances of them in this era, they're just an awesome thing to see as a live band. They sound great. And so, I mean, highest recommendation. This album's fantastic. If you haven't listened to it, listen to it. It's hard for me to believe that someone who has a palette of music maybe beyond the pure pop or like one genre specific preference could not like this album. Because there really is. The only thing I can think of is maybe someone might not like Joe Strummer's voice, but I mean, you're really reaching. If that's what's keeping you out.
His voice is great. Do you think that, like, with an album like this, because I would agree it does, not to say it wears out its welcome, but the length, to me, it is noticeable. Not that I'm like, oh, I hope this is over soon. It's just like it does kind of, it loses a little traction towards the end. And
I wish it was like a 13-song album instead of, longer.
I'm wondering if if that's because really, I think, and I agree, I think the first half is stronger than the second half. But I'm also wondering if that's just, it just suffers from the length of it, right? If they release this like the Use Your Illusions or whatever, that there were two separate albums listed, I mean, it's London Calling A and B or whatever, right? Volume 1, Volume 2, and you would just maybe if you were able to separate it like that. Would that make it even better, because sometimes I think that long albums do, and we're going to come across that because there's albums as we get. But
then I'd lose Wrong and Boyo and Death or Glory or Train.
No, you're not losing that.
Revolution Rock,
No, I'm saying that take all those songs and just put them in a separate, London Calling Volume 2. It's still its own album, but you would listen to it maybe separately. Not all. You would listen to it as a whole as opposed to
I would agree with you on Sandinista, but not this one.
Okay. Yeah. And it's just interesting because we're going to be coming, as we go into this in the 90s and stuff, there's albums that are like single albums that are like 70 minutes long.
That's one of the things you notice. The albums get
because
expansive.
Of the CD. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think they've, I mean, they're clearly one of the the best like punk rock bands of this era, if not bands in general. Do you think they kind of lost any of their, not cred, but do you think they were better as a punk rock band, or do you think this was kind of the natural, inevitable evolution for them?
I think like a lot of bands like this, that they just weren't meant to burn bright for a long time, which people forget about bands. And sometimes certain bands are meant to run. Well, the Clash technically went into the mid '80s. They made that god awful "Cut the Crap" album. They made, after this it's Sandinista and then Combat Rock, which was their biggest selling album in the United States by quite a bit, and I think features interesting, much like Pink Floyd, features probably their two most well-known songs on that album, which also serves as the album that longtime fans of the band are like, oh, that's when they sucked. While there's another whole group of people that probably first experienced the Clash through Rock the Casbah, which is how I did. Now, I will say this. I talked about teenagers and adolescents hearing an album like Pink Floyd The Wall and connected to it immediately. That's my experience with like this album. Yeah. Like I listened to this for the first time when I was 12, and it's like, these guys are me.
These are my guys.
These are me. These people write in a way I like sonically. They delve into the sounds I like. They write political lyrics that even if I wasn't all the way in on them yet, I knew that I liked lyrics with a little bit more bite in them than, love, 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 or, sex, 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 or, it just was sort of, I realized immediately and viscerally that this was both a sonic palette and an energy and like a level of intellect that was going to connect with me. So it was interesting to listen to this album the same week that we listened to The Wall, because I know a not insignificant amount of people who that album was their version of this for them. So,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. So and there's other albums. It's amazing how many albums from this late 70s period are sort of those type albums for me.
Where they
like ones that just immediately resonated with me. Yep. Whether it be you were actually not going to do this album, I don't think, but some of the early Police albums, or we'll get to the Police, but we'll do later ones. The Specials album I've talked about at length before. That Buzzcocks album. Some of these were ones that Blondie, Parallel Lines. Those were all albums that hit me all at once, and I was like, this all's around that period, and that period's awesome. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll be interested. I don't think I've not listened to Sandinista. I don't think I've listened to Combat Rock, so I'll be interested.
I don't think we're going to do Combat Rock.
Oh, I'll listen to it on my own, I guess.
Gotcha. It's an easy listen. It's an easy listen.
Well, Sandinista, are we doing that? Because right now it's 105. Oh, actually, it's in Rolling Stone's list, so we're going to.
It's in Rolling Stones, so we're going to cover it from that. Yeah,
it's just barely out of the 80s right now. And Combat Rock's 134 in the 80s. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
And Cut the Crap's probably like 9,000 something.
Cut the Crap is 1,731.
Well, there's no Jones in that. It's a mess, and I think they've all disowned it as well. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's all right. You can't always hit, John.
No.
What's your favorite track on this album? Because I know we've listed like 17 that we liked. But
Spanish Bombs. Spanish Bombs is my favorite, yeah.
I like Hateful a lot. That might be up there. I think it changes every time I listen to this album.
I could agree, because it's been different ones at different times for me.
Yeah.
Clampdown's been there for me at times. Guns of Brixton.
I can't say. I can say that the songs that I liked the most that were kind of like, I don't know, ones that I hadn't really. I liked the Card Sheet a lot, and I like the Right Profile a lot too. So maybe I'd go with one of those two. But
all right,
it's hard to go wrong. You can't really go wrong with that question of this record, because you could make the argument for just about all of them. So
yeah,
no, good stuff. My highest rec.
Yep.